Hello, everyone. I think with that, we can get started for today. Just sharing the slides. Before we dive in, it would be great if everyone could quickly share from where they're joining from, which region, and gives the late joiners a bit of time to also catch up. That would be great if you can just paste that in the chat. We ourselves, the presenters of today, are based in Switzerland, in different cities today. We have Bern, Basel, and Zurich. Then we have Germany, more from Switzerland. All right, with that, I think we can get started with today's slides. So, quick overview on the agenda. We do intro on who we are, who the presenters are today, take you a bit into the journey that we usually see with the clients when it comes to all topics security and compliance. And we will also have Marcin, who shows us a hands-on example of the Azure Policy and Compliance Manager. And at the end, if there's still time, we can, of course, do a round of questions. So, to the faces of today, we have Marcin. He is our senior cloud architect and usually the guy I run to when there's a question too technical and I cannot answer myself. We also have Monika with us today. She's the senior GRC advisor and her experience is huge. I think you could fill a full library with it. And then myself, I'm a project manager here at Nordcloud. And of course, in my daily business, I always have questions and hurdles to take when it comes to compliance topics. Speaking of diving into the journey, we usually see when approaching a new client, we have this great sales conversation. Everything seems to be good, and we're usually very, very close to finishing it, and then out of nowhere comes some interesting questions from the client itself. Usually they have internally some talks, and then topics like NIS comes up, GDPR, all the regulations that they have internally as well that they want to follow up on. And that usually slows down the whole process, right? And we have to answer more questions, provide more and more documentation on everything. And that's pretty standard. That I would say we see in 95% of the cases. But the good news on it is, no matter which regulation they follow, it's always more or less the same questions and the same requirements. So also important takeaway for everyone in the call. Preparation is everything in this case, so just prepare, document, and you're basically good to go in 80% of the questions the clients throw at you. And just a bit on the landscape internally on why this sometimes happens or why it can take such a long time. I mean, we usually have 1 or 2 contacts at the clients, we talk to them, everything looks good. But of course, internally, they do have their own units that they have to satisfy or usually have checklists. And the checklists come out quite late in the process. And those are the usual suspects that we see. So from InfoSec to procurement, there's a lot involved on the client side as well. And as we move along, and sometimes even after we signed with them and we started our projects, the engineering teams are coming in as well. And that's why it's great to have our own people on board, such as Marcin, as those are then the more technical talks I was mentioning in the beginning. And that's usually what we see in the standard process of what we go through when we have a new client or also an existing client, because it's a never-ending story. There's always updates and new hot topics, and those hot topics, Monika will take over now and dive into some of them.
Thank you, Cecile. So, as Cecile mentioned, there's always kind of these compliance question coming up, and we see it from different angles. So, one angle is, for instance, if you have ISVs or solution providers, and they want to sell into corporate clients, and I think, as I see that we have many of Swiss participants, what we feel is that if you have a solution, it's you enter the enterprise market fairly quickly. So it's not like maybe in Germany where it's much more difficult to get into large clients early on. Actually, in Switzerland, it's fairly quickly. But some of these is actually that we find very often. So it's like NIS2, the Network Information Security Directive, which is new. And this is why we see quite as a hot topic also with enterprise clients that they want to see how this can be fulfilled. We have the beloved GDPR, so the data protection regulation that also has, of course, a Swiss counterpart, but here we talk about also the EU one. We have the Cyber Resilience Act. This is a new legislation coming up also in the EU, which is more like on electronic products, but that includes also, like, for instance, websites, let's say ISVs or SaaS solutions, and of course now most recently the AI Act. Now, coming from Switzerland, you might ask yourself, why do I show here actually the EU regulations? And one of the things is that we see that also our enterprise customers, they're implementing also the EU regulations, very simply that because they have clients in the EU space or they want to sell into the EU space, quite very often we also have to fulfill the EU regulations. Now, let's dive into the NIS2 directive a little bit more in detail. Like we see here is what is the new version of that? So, or what is the NIS, if you will? So it's really like the Network Information Security Directive, and it's really aimed to establish a baseline for security measures for, let's say, what we used to call critical infrastructure, but with a wider scope. And when you talk to customers, it's very often these two elements that are really stressed. The first one is now it's board level responsibility to actually implement cybersecurity measures. So it's not like it used to be where this is something where you'd say maybe a little bit under the radar as far as security is concerned, but it's really on board level and they held accountable. And the other thing is the whole element of supply chain security, which means that if you're an enterprise client and you're evaluating a new solution, you actually have to check whether the new solution fits your needs or fits what you need to fulfill as a company for cybersecurity measures. Or if you're selling into this space, you have to prove to your potential customer and enterprise that you want to sell into that you actually fulfill these requirements. And what we see here on the next slide is a little bit these areas that are covered. So what you can see here, it's very big on risk analysis and risk assessment. So companies need to evaluate, do I have a risk, a cybersecurity risk, because of the solution that I want to buy? Or vice versa, if you want to sell into, is you have to prove to the enterprise customer that actually your solution fits their needs. And what you can see here is some of the elements are more on process level. So if you have like incident handling, there's obviously an element which are procedures, which are processes that need to be in place, how you also interface with your customers. Same goes for business continuity. There's also some architectural elements, but also there are some elements like if you see here system security, or you see here like encryption, or you see authentication, communication. These are very much technical kind of elements that you need to implement. This is important just to keep in mind, because what Martin will show later on in the demo part is actually how you can make sure that these kind of requirements are fulfilled, or how you can demonstrate to your customer how it is for how these requirements are fulfilled. And likewise, this is probably what companies want to know from you if you are providing an ISV solution, or you're a startup, or you're selling into the enterprise stage. What you can see also here is they're not new topics if you look at these from a security perspective, but they are now much more stringent and much more in detail of what is required. Now, if I'm a customer and I want to understand what is going on, is that we see here on the next slide is what will they ask you? So if I'm an enterprise customer and I want to buy a solution, and this solution might be a newer solution, or you have some innovation in this solution, I will always check is what are the responsibilities? Where is my responsibility? Where is your responsibility as an ISV or SaaS solution provider? But also what is covered by, for instance, Azure and Microsoft, because you are sitting on the Azure stack with your solution. So this is very important to keep in mind. Your customer will always want to see where are you in terms of the solution architecture, what are you sitting on, what are the kind of the contractual agreements, what are your certifications. So what, for instance, what Azure or what Microsoft has is fairly well known, because most of the customers had already had some interaction with Microsoft. But also, what are you providing in terms of certifications or in evidence that these regulations or these kind of requirements can be covered? The architecture. So they will want to know is this a good practice architecture? Are you respecting, like what we know, for instance, from Azure or Microsoft, the well architected frameworks? What are the security controls that are in place? And again, Marcin will show of like how you can prove or how you can check of what is already in place. And also how it is documented. So always remember that if you sell into a regulated space, or if you want to demonstrate that you're covering security controls or fulfill regulatory requirements, documentation is everything. So I'm also at one part coming from audit, and there you had, if it's not documented, it is not, it doesn't exist. So there is really kind of a binary approach. And then also the standards that you're following. So on a technical level, we see that all these kind of regulations, whether GDPR, whether the NIS2 directive, translate into the technical elements of the Center for Information or Center of Internet Security, the CIS controls, which are technical controls that you can also monitor and check if they're compliant. And this is a well accepted framework to demonstrate technical, that you're complying on a technical level with security requirements. Also, we have the Cloud Security Alliance, where quite a few customers already also use this framework to see what needs to be in place. But here, like on a technical level that we're talking about, it's mostly the CIS controls that are in place. Now, talking a little bit about the shared responsibility model, there's really kind of also what needs to be in place, or where we can look at, if we look at this one, in the next slide, is for the shared responsibility model, it's important to understand, one back, too enthusiastic. Exactly, the shared responsibility model. So this is really like where the clients need to understand what is covered by Azure, what is covered by Microsoft, and where do you sit? Because as you can see from the different kind of elements that you see here in these four pillars, it really depends on who's responsible for what. So if you are providing a SaaS solution, if you're an ISV provider, you can see that there's quite a bit where you actually sit, or basically then you're using PaaS or infrastructure service or platform as a service, where you say, this is what I'm using from Microsoft, but actually this is what I'm responsible for, because my application is sitting on the Azure stack and is making use and benefit from these kind of solutions. Is your customer want to know how you cover the rest. So if you say, like, if I use like Azure for platform as a service, they will want to know what is covered by your solution, what are your security controls that you have in place, what are your processes, And on top of that, they need to understand what is their responsibility. So they will always want to know, where do you use like Azure? Have you set up Azure, or like the landing zone, or how have you implemented the CIS controls, for instance, so that they can make use of it and they can understand of what is already covered, how it is covered, and what they need to make sure that they have, for instance, in place. So when we talk about the next slide about the governance and ensures compliance, and what I usually stress talking to ISV providers, also startups, is think early on about what your customers need to understand, or where your customers are in terms of regulations. So what is of interest to them? And when you look at these different requirements, there's one element where you can see that is purely on process level. This is documentation. These are processes that need to be in place. And then you have an element where you say you have technical requirements covering the application design and application security design. And then there's the technical requirements towards the infrastructure, like usually known as the landing zones. And when customers want to understand, so for instance, like GDPR or NIS directive, and say, okay, this is the requirement, they usually want to know, how did you implement this on a technical level? And there actually, as mentioned before, is really like the CIS control framework, the Center of Internet Security frameworks, where you can download best practices for different kind of technology stacks. And what is very interesting to know is that also, for instance, like Microsoft uses these kind of controls within their well-architectured frameworks or security baselines. So this is definitely something that is of interest to you, to see and check whether actually what you've implemented is in compliance with these kind of CIS controls or security controls that are in place. And how this can be checked. So you wonder, maybe, do I have to do this like manually, go through it? How do I check this? Is now that Marcin will show us of how you can make use of the Microsoft tools to check what is implemented, and also to see like how can it be remediated.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I would like to talk about two Azure services relevant to compliance. The first one is Azure Policy, a tool used for governance enforcement, auditing, compliance assessment, and reporting. The second one is Compliance Manager service, which is part of the Microsoft Purview platform and Microsoft 365. This service is specifically designed to conduct compliance assessments and generate detailed reports. Next, I will demonstrate to you how to use both of these tools to create compliance assessment, view compliance scores, and generate reports. Yeah, let's jump into first demo. And yeah, here we are immediately in our Azure Policy. We create a first initiative. We're in the scope of my subscription, but the scope can be also the whole tenant. And here on the right side, we have yeah, various categories. And one of those categories is regulatory compliance. It's a built-in definition, and we can it's ready to use. We see that one of the regulations here are PCI DSS, ISO, and the NIST. But today we are interested, as mentioned before, in CIS version 2. Okay. I will not, this policy can be enforced, but today I will not enforce it, which means that this will be used only for auditing purposes. Yeah, here I can specify I will specify 90 days as a maximum days to rotate the key. This is industry, say, standard. Move to remediation. yeah, I don't enforce policy, so there will be no automatic remediations which will adjust resources which are not conform with this policy initiative. So I'll not also use management identities here. Yeah, this potentially it's our option here. And here I can specify the default message which is visible when resource is created and it's not available. We have to run the demo again. The best to the place where we stopped.
Yeah. 1 second there.
Okay. It's fine. It's fine. Can you make it full screen? Okay, great. Yeah, fantastic. So I put the default message there. And yeah, we see here a lot of policies being part of this initiative. Those policies are implementation of the CIS controls, right? So we see, for example, a storage account should restrict network access, right? This is yeah, one example. I will not create here the initiative already pre-created before to save time. It's already available in overview. Yeah, so here it is, this version 2. I'm going into that. And yeah, we see all the controls which are part of CIS security framework. And we see information which controls are actually okay, and which are actually we should fix and work on them, right? And when we go to the policies, and the policies actually implement the controls. And here we see that we have 151 controls and 280 anti policies, which means some controls require more than one policy to be defined for them. Now I will try to create the report. So we have overall compliance overview, and we want to actually export to a file the sort of our report. What is the condition of our compliance level? And I will use for that PowerShell command and export the data to CSV file. Yeah. It's done. It's already exported to the file, and yeah, we can see the file is there. It's quite large, and yeah, I can download it. This is one example how this can be done, but of course it could be automated and yeah, triggered on regular basis. Right? So yeah, we have here a lot of details. This is like raw representation. So we have here information about the resource, basically each resource we have currently in that scope in my subscription, and then information whether this resource is compliant, and we have also information about the policies, right? All the policies which we have defined there. So this information is pretty raw. We probably have to process it in some way. And compliance manager, which I will show next, has a little bit more better solution. It depends what is required actually. Okay, let's jump into the demo for compliance manager. Let's start from beginning. Okay, so we are already in a compliance manager. As I mentioned, this is part of the Microsoft purview. We see here overall compliance score. I have already multiple assessments defined there. That's why we see already this compliance score being delivered. We have below more information. I will get to them later. First, I will show how to create actually a new assessment from scratch, as we did for Azure policy. Here we see much more regulation available, which we can use to scan our resources. We have CIS, and we have also recently added EU Artificial Intelligence Act, GDPR, and ISO. And also NIST directive, EU directive, NIST, PCI DSS. We will focus only on Azure, and we'll look for the CIS. We'll select level 2. We'll provide the name, the assessment. Yeah, we'll stick to Azure as a service here, and here we will apply this assessment to all of our subscription in the tenant, but we can obviously restrict this assessment to only, for example, only production subscription. Okay, again, I will not create this assessment because I already pre-created before to save time again. And here we see it's there. It's level foundation level 2. It's in progress. Still, we have 89 improvements to make to be fully compliant. We go into it, and yeah, the same as in Azure policy, we see a lot more details here. We see the controls. Yeah, the progress is 62%, and we see all the controls. Those are the categories in which our controls are grouped. In CIS controls are grouped. Networking, storage account, virtual machines. Yeah, if we open storage accounts, we see, for example, that yeah, the soft delete is actually enabled. It's passed. Status is passed for that. But if we go to databases, database services, auditing is set on is failing. Right? So this is the potential improvement area. Here we can go directly into improvements, and we first focus on file at high risk issues, and yeah, this auditing on SQL Server should be enabled. Exactly. Storage account should restrict network access. This is also missing, high risk issue. If we go deeper into that implementation, then we have a suggested way how we can solve that problem. And we have also information below which actually subscription, in which subscriptions we have this issue. So we can go directly there and fix it. The test type is automatic, which means the state will be evaluated, assessment will be conducted automatically, and if we fix it, the problem will disappear. Additionally, we can add here evidence manually that the problem was actually solved. and we are compliant with this specific control. At the end, I will demonstrate how to generate the report. It's much more convenient way that we had for Azure policy because it's a part of actually the UI interface. So the report itself, it's pretty already nice formatted and provides us a lot of useful information. This executive summary, where we have overall information how many controls we actually already positively pass, and we don't need to implement a solution. And below we have very detailed information. Which control to which degree we already pass. That I find very useful actually here, and we can use that information to actually focus on particular controls. Yeah. So this is long list here. All right, that would be it from my side.
Okay. I think at this point we would switch over to questions if someone has any or something they would like to discuss while we are still around and online. You can paste them in the chat if you have any. Then in that case, of course, if you still have a question 2 days after this one, feel free to.
There's one question actually.
Okay.
What is on the chat? What is the difference between policy and initiative? So initiative is a group of policies, right? Of policies. So if you don't want to deal with single policies, you rather group them in initiative and you work with those with that initiative and assign them to the certain scope in your tenant. Either to usually it's the scope is management group. On the demo I showed the I was limited to my subscription. That's why the scope was subscription, but usually it should be level on management group. So the answer, yeah. Okay.
Good. All right. I think that concludes today. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.